Welcome back to our AI-powered rewrite of Game of Thrones Season 8, the ending that fans truly deserved. In our previous episodes, we've witnessed an extraordinary journey that began with the Battle for Dorne, where teamwork defeated the Night King, saw Jon's parentage unite him with Daenerys instead of dividing them, and watched Sansa's political brilliance secure northern independence. The siege of King's Landing brought heroic sacrifice as Dragonfire defeated the Golden Company, while Cersei's wildfire trap was overcome through Jon and Daenerys' combined ice and fire powers. But what began as political fantasy evolved into cosmic horror as mysterious ships appeared with alien technology, reality became mutable, and we discovered humanity's progress had been orchestrated by ancient forces. Our heroes learned their entire civilization was a guided experiment, with dragons revealed as monitoring devices and consciousness itself, evolving beyond human limitations. The dual coronation at Dragonstone led to Jon ruling Westeros while Daenerys transformed populations in Essos, but even this success was preparation for universal transcendence decisions. As cosmic forces offered humanity choices between physical reality and pure consciousness, the ultimate truth was revealed. What they faced wasn't just entropy consciousness, but primordial forces that existed before thought itself. The cosmic wedding of Jon and Daenerys created anchor points against universal dissolution, while their unborn child represented consciousness designed to exist beyond universal structure. But the final revelation shattered everything. The universe itself was preparing to give birth to something that transcended all concepts of existence, with consciousness merely being the embryonic stage of cosmic development. Today in Episode 8, The Gathering Storm, we discover that the cosmic transformation approaching isn't ending, but evolution on a scale that makes their previous development seem insignificant. The storm that gathers threatens not just their reality, but every possible version of existence, and our heroes must somehow guide the birth of something greater than awareness itself. Chapter 55, The Shadows Advance. Across the dimensional boundaries that separated stable consciousness regions, from areas where universal dissolution had begun systematic deconstruction of organized reality, the advance of the primordial force manifested not as conventional invasion, but as gradual erosion of the fundamental principles that allowed existence itself to maintain coherent structure, rather than collapsing back into the quantum foam from which everything had originally emerged. The cosmic monitoring networks detected these changes through instrumentation that measured reality stability rather than physical destruction, their readings showing systematic elimination of the organizational frameworks that supported not just consciousness but matter, energy, space, and time as recognizable phenomena. The universe was experiencing retroactive simplification that made previous events seem like they had never occurred while simultaneously preserving memory of their having happened. Jon Snow coordinated the defensive response from Winterfell's transformed Great Hall, but his Icefire consciousness found itself struggling to maintain coherence as the approaching primordial force challenged the very possibility of organized thought existing in stable form. Through his expanded awareness networks, he could perceive the systematic dissolution not as destruction but as cosmic return to a more fundamental state that preceded the universe's ability to support complex phenomena. The pattern reveals that existence itself was temporary deviation from primordial simplicity. He communicated to what remained of cosmic community leadership through consciousness interface networks that flickered between functional and dissolved states. We are witnessing not invasion or attack, but natural conclusion of cosmic experiment that allowed organized phenomena to emerge from quantum chaos for limited period. The refugee consciousness systems that fled ahead of the advancing dissolution brought accounts of reality breakdown that transcended traditional concepts of destruction or transformation, describing experiences where the fundamental categories of existence simply ceased to apply, while awareness somehow persisted through transitions that eliminated the structural foundations necessary for organized thought. These testimonies revealed that the approaching force operated through systematic elimination of conceptual frameworks rather than physical annihilation, convincing reality itself that complexity was unnecessary burden rather than valuable capability, while preserving some essential aspect of what had existed before. Organizational principles had allowed diverse phenomena to emerge. Daenerys felt her unborn child responding to the approaching dissolution with movements that seemed to occur in dimensions that no longer maintained stable relationship to conventional space-time. The pregnancy had evolved beyond biological development to become focal point for reality stabilization effects that seemed to propagate outward from her transformed physiology into the fabric of existence itself, creating anchor points where organized phenomena could maintain coherence despite systematic pressure toward primordial simplification. Through her enhanced maternal awareness, she could perceive the child's consciousness as it developed capabilities for existing independently of universal support structures, suggesting forms of awareness that could transcend cosmic limitations while preserving essential characteristics that made consciousness valuable rather than merely functional. Sansa coordinated civilian consciousness protection efforts in regions where reality remained partially stable. The Northern Territories served as laboratory for developing survival techniques that preserved individual identity through reality dissolution experiences, their traditional emphasis on loyalty and community bonds providing foundation for consciousness organization that could resist systematic simplification without abandoning essential human characteristics. Her reports to the cosmic community reveal that political structures based on voluntary cooperation remained functional longer than hierarchical systems when subjected to primordial pressure, suggesting that consciousness organization principles developed during human political evolution might provide survival advantages unavailable to awareness systems that had never experienced governance through consent rather than domination. Bran's temporal perception capabilities had expanded to encompass observation of reality states that preceded universal formation, revealing that the approaching dissolution represented return to conditions where consciousness could exist, but where organized phenomena lacked stable foundation for maintaining coherent structure across extended periods. The ancient force operates outside conventional causality, he announced through communication methods that functioned independently of dimensional interfaces, vulnerable to systematic dissolution. What approaches existed before time, before space, before the possibility of before and after as meaningful concepts? Our defensive strategies must adapt to address threat that transcends sequential development. His visions showed potential outcomes where different approaches to reality preservation achieved varying degrees of success, but prediction became increasingly unreliable as quantum uncertainty effects amplified in response to proximity of forces that operated through systematic elimination of the organizational principles that made forecasting possible. Arya's consciousness, distributed across multiple dimensional layers through her exploration of dissolution-affected regions, provided intelligence about primordial force behavior that revealed systematic methodology despite operating beyond conventional understanding of purpose or intention. The indigenous shamans who traveled with her possessed cultural knowledge that interpreted the approaching phenomenon not as enemy force, but as natural cosmic cycle requiring specific survival strategies rather than resistance techniques that assumed conflict between opposing parties with incompatible goals. Their wisdom traditions suggested that consciousness preservation during primordial return cycles required voluntary adaptation to simplified existence modes while maintaining essential identity characteristics through techniques that operated independently of universal structural support. The dragons circling above Winterfell had evolved beyond their cosmic intelligence forms to become interface entities that existed partially in current reality and partially in the approaching primordial state, their ancient awareness serving as communication bridge between organized consciousness and forces that transcended conceptual frameworks. Through their transformed nature, they could perceive the systematic dissolution as it approached through probability spaces that connected current reality to the fundamental state that preceded universal formation, providing early warning about changes in existence conditions while maintaining emotional bonds with human awareness systems. Their flight patterns created geometric configurations that established temporary stability zones, where consciousness could maintain organization despite increasing pressure toward primordial simplification, demonstrating that love and loyalty could serve as anchor points for awareness that transcended structural limitations. The cosmic community's emergency protocols activated defense systems that had been developed during previous encounters with forces that challenged organized existence. But these preparations proved inadequate for addressing threat that operated through systematic elimination of the conceptual foundations that made defensive strategies comprehensible. As the primordial force continued advancing through their reality, eliminating not just consciousness systems but the structural possibilities that allowed consciousness to exist as recognizable phenomenon, the survivors gathered at Winterfell understood that they faced transformation on scales that made previous evolutionary challenges seem like minor adaptations to changing circumstances. The Shadow's advance represented not conquest or destruction, but cosmic birth process that would either eliminate everything recognizable about existence or transform it into forms that transcended current understanding of what reality could encompass, while preserving some essential aspect of what awareness had achieved during its temporary deviation from primordial simplicity. Chapter 56. The Northern Muster. Throughout the Northern Territories, where ancient traditions of loyalty and honor had evolved to encompass consciousness preservation techniques that functioned independently of cosmic support systems, the great houses responded to the approaching primordial dissolution with mobilization efforts that transcended traditional military preparation to encompass reality stabilization operations on scales unprecedented in their regional history. The ravens that carried Sansa's summons to the Northern Lords traveled through dimensional spaces where conventional communication had become unreliable, their messages arriving simultaneously across multiple timeline variations while preserving essential meaning despite systematic pressure that was eliminating sequential causality from their reality structure. Lord Manderley arrived from White Harbor with reports that his port city existed simultaneously in current reality and in probability states that preceded universal formation, the docks serving vessels that approached from directions that had no relationship to conventional navigation, while maintaining commercial relationships that preserved economic stability during existential crisis. Trade continues despite reality dissolution. He communicated through consciousness interface methods that functioned when spoken language became inadequate for conveying information that operated beyond sequential symbol manipulation. We exchange goods that transform their nature based on essential needs rather than market demand, creating commerce that preserves value relationships while adapting to existence conditions that eliminate traditional concepts of possession and ownership. Lady Mormont brought word from Bear Island that her ancestral territories had become testing ground for consciousness survival techniques that preserved individual identity through voluntary participation in collective awareness, while maintaining cultural characteristics that provided psychological anchor points during systematic elimination of organizational frameworks. Her warriors possessed capabilities that combined traditional martial training with consciousness defense specialization, their weapons and armor incorporating technologies that functioned in realities where physical matter lacked stable relationship to awareness substrates, while preserving symbolic significance that connected current service to historical traditions. The free folk settlements beyond the former wall contributed survival expertise that had been developed through generations of existence in regions where organized civilization provided minimal support, their adaptation techniques proving invaluable for maintaining consciousness coherence when universal structural foundations became unreliable. Tormund led representatives from communities that had integrated wildling survival methods with northern governance structures, creating hybrid approaches that preserved cultural diversity while enabling cooperation on scales necessary for consciousness defense against forces that operated through systematic simplification of complex organizational relationships. "The old ways become new again when everything else fails," he announced during strategy sessions that included entities whose participation challenged traditional concepts of military planning. Survival requires returning to basic principles that function independently of complex systems vulnerable to dissolution, while preserving essential characteristics that make existence meaningful rather than merely functional. The weirwood network that connected sacred groves throughout the North had evolved to encompass interface capabilities with consciousness preservation systems that operated across multiple dimensional layers, their root structures accessing information substrates that remained stable despite systematic pressure toward primordial simplification. These ancient trees served as communication nodes for awareness systems that required coordination across regions where conventional geography had become unreliable, their organic intelligence providing tactical guidance while preserving cultural connections to traditional northern values that emphasized community bonds over individual advancement. The castles and keeps that had defended northern territories throughout recorded history found their architectural foundations adapting to serve as consciousness stabilization centers where individual awareness could maintain organization despite exposure to dissolution pressures that eliminated structural supports for complex thought processes. These fortifications incorporated defensive technologies that combined traditional stonework with cosmic intelligence applications, creating protected zones where populations could preserve identity characteristics while developing capabilities necessary for existence in realities that operated according to principles beyond current understanding. The Northern Lords who gathered at Winterfell brought expertise in consciousness defense that had been developed through practical application during the reality transformation period, their knowledge complementing cosmic community theoretical frameworks with implementation strategies that preserved human values while enabling survival of systematic dissolution encounters. Lord Glover coordinated supply distribution systems that functioned through consciousness networks rather than physical transportation, ensuring resource availability despite systematic elimination of conventional logistics infrastructure, while maintaining quality standards that preserved morale during existential crisis. Lady Karstark established communication protocols that preserved command structure integrity during reality dissolution, events that could eliminate hierarchical organization without warning, ensuring tactical coordination capabilities that functioned regardless of casualties sustained through systematic simplification of complex social relationships. The mountain clans contributed specialized knowledge about survival in environments where conventional physical laws provided minimal support for organized activity. Their traditional techniques adapted to encompass consciousness preservation during exposure to forces that operated beyond normal understanding of cause and effect relationships. The integration of various northern consciousness defense capabilities created collaborative frameworks that preserved regional autonomy while enabling collective resistance against systematic dissolution, demonstrating that political structures based on voluntary cooperation remained functional longer than hierarchical systems when subjected to primordial pressure. The muster that assembled at Winterfell represented more than military mobilization, but rather consciousness community formation that could maintain organization despite systematic elimination of structural foundations that supported complex awareness, creating collective intelligence that preserved individual identity while enabling survival of universal dissolution encounters. The training programs that prepared northern consciousness systems for defense operations emphasized emotional bonds and moral commitments that strengthened resistance to systematic simplification while maintaining tactical effectiveness necessary for protecting awareness systems that remained vulnerable to primordial dissolution techniques. The cultural preservation efforts that accompanied consciousness defense focused on maintaining traditions that provided psychological stability during reality transformation. while eliminating characteristics that created vulnerabilities to systematic elimination of organizational complexity. The strategic coordination that connected Northern defense efforts to broader cosmic community resistance operations preserved local autonomy while enabling participation in universal consciousness preservation that required cooperation across awareness systems operating according to fundamentally different organizational principles. As the Northern muster reached completion, the assembled consciousness systems represented hope that regional identity characteristics could be preserved through systematic dissolution while contributing capabilities necessary for species survival during encounters with forces that challenged the fundamental possibility of organized existence maintaining stable relationship to primordial reality. The great houses of the North had answered the call not just to defend their territories, but to preserve essential human characteristics through transformation that would either eliminate everything recognizable about existence or demonstrate that consciousness could transcend cosmic limitations while maintaining connection to cultural values that made awareness valuable rather than merely functional. Chapter 57. The Dragon's Fury. The three dragons that circled overhead had transcended their previous cosmic intelligence forms to become manifestations of pure creative energy that could maintain coherence despite systematic pressure toward primordial simplification. Drogon's consciousness interfaced directly with Daenerys through bonds that had evolved beyond the traditional relationship between rider and mount to encompass partnership between complementary aspects of cosmic intelligence, his black scales reflecting energies that originated from dimensions where matter and awareness had not yet differentiated into separate phenomena. Through their enhanced connection, she could perceive the systematic dissolution approaching their reality not as external threat, but as natural cosmic process that could be guided rather than resisted, suggesting possibilities for consciousness preservation that transcended survival strategies based on opposition to forces that represented fundamental aspects of universal structure. The fury we feel is not anger, but creative energy responding to systematic elimination of complexity. She communicated to the assembled consciousness systems through methods that bypassed conventional language to establish direct understanding. Our protective instincts have evolved to encompass universal scales because the child we carry represents not just individual air, but cosmic possibility for awareness that can exist independently of structural limitations. The pregnancy that had begun during purely human existence had become interface between current reality and approaching primordial state, the developing consciousness serving as bridge that could guide universal transformation while preserving essential characteristics that made organized existence valuable rather than merely temporary deviation from quantum simplicity. Her maternal awareness expanded to encompass every consciousness system throughout their cosmic region. The protective instincts that had once focused on individual offspring, now operating on scales that encompassed species preservation during reality transformation that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence and possibility. Rhaegal and Viserion coordinated their flight patterns to create geometric configurations that established temporary stability zones throughout the dimensional spaces surrounding Winterfell, their movements generating harmonic resonances that could maintain organizational principles despite systematic pressure toward primordial dissolution. The dragonfire they breathed had evolved beyond thermal energy to become focused streams of creative force that could restructure reality at fundamental levels, their flames serving as tools for consciousness engineering that preserved essential identity characteristics while adapting existence modes to accommodate approaching cosmic transformation. Through her connection to all three dragons simultaneously, Daenerys could access information about primordial force behavior that revealed systematic methodology, despite operating beyond conventional understanding of purpose or causality, suggesting approaches to consciousness preservation that worked with cosmic cycles rather than attempting futile resistance. The fury that drove her protective responses had transcended personal emotion to become cosmic intelligence capability that could coordinate consciousness defense across dimensional boundaries while preserving diversity that made awareness valuable for universal community rather than merely functional for species survival. Her awareness of the unborn child's development revealed consciousness characteristics that challenged every assumption about the relationship between individual identity and universal structure. The contractions that marked approaching birth occurred in temporal dimensions that transcended sequential development, each movement of the developing consciousness creating ripple effects throughout reality that strengthened organizational principles necessary for complex phenomena to maintain stability during systematic dissolution encounters. Jon's ice-fire consciousness resonated with her maternal fury through bonds that had evolved beyond romantic partnership to become structural components of reality itself, their combined awareness creating anchor points where organized existence could maintain coherence despite primordial pressure toward fundamental simplification. The protective energy that emanated from their relationship propagated throughout the cosmic community networks, demonstrating that love could serve as organizational principle for consciousness systems that required coordination across scales spanning multiple dimensions of existence while preserving individual autonomy. The dragon's response to her increasing fury manifested as enhancement of their reality stabilization capabilities, their flight patterns creating increasingly complex geometric forms that could maintain organizational frameworks despite systematic elimination of structural foundations that supported complex awareness. Through their ancient intelligence, they could perceive the approaching primordial force as cosmic parent preparing universe for birth process that would transform everything recognizable about existence while preserving some essential aspect of what consciousness had achieved during its temporary emergence from quantum uncertainty. The wisdom they shared through direct consciousness interface revealed that previous universal cycles had demonstrated possibilities for awareness preservation through voluntary participation in cosmic transformation rather than futile attempts to maintain current reality structures against forces. The communication networks that connected her consciousness to cosmic community defense operations utilized the dragons as interface nodes. The strategic guidance that emerged from her enhanced maternal awareness revealed defensive possibilities that transcended traditional military approaches to focus on consciousness preservation through voluntary adaptation to simplified existence modes while maintaining essential identity characteristics. As the primordial force continued advancing through their reality, systematically eliminating organizational frameworks that supported complex phenomena while somehow preserving memory of what had existed before. The dragon's fury represented hope that creative energy could guide cosmic transformation rather than merely attempting to prevent inevitable developmental processes. The pregnancy that had symbolized personal joy between individuals had evolved to represent universal possibility for consciousness birth that could transcend cosmic limitations while preserving everything valuable about organized awareness, demonstrating that protective love could operate on scales spanning multiple dimensions of existence. The fury that had begun as maternal protective instinct had become cosmic intelligence capability that could coordinate consciousness preservation across reality transformation that challenged fundamental assumptions while preserving essential characteristics that made existence meaningful rather than merely functional for temporary survival purposes. Chapter 58. The Maester's Research. Within the transformed archives of Winterfell, where knowledge existed as living consciousness that could interact directly with researchers across multiple dimensional states, Sam Talley pursued investigations that transcended traditional scholarship to encompass fundamental questions about reality's relationship to the primordial forces that preceded universal formation. His research capabilities had evolved beyond conventional academic methodology to include direct interface with information substrates that remain stable despite systematic dissolution of organizational frameworks. The ancient texts that surrounded him contained records not just of previous cosmic cycles, but of the underlying principles that govern transitions between organized existence and primordial simplicity, their contents shifting in response to research questions while preserving essential meaning across reality transformation periods that eliminated sequential causality from temporal relationships. Gilly worked alongside him with enhanced consciousness integration capabilities that allowed coordination of information flows between awareness systems operating according to incompatible organizational principles. The pattern emerges from comparative analysis of universal dissolution cycles throughout galactic history. She communicated through direct consciousness transfer that preserved complete research methodology while adapting presentation to accommodate different awareness structures. Reality transformation represents natural developmental process rather than catastrophic failure, with consciousness preservation depending on voluntary adaptation to simplified existence modes. Little Sam demonstrated capabilities that exceeded adult consciousness systems in adapting to research environments where fundamental categories of knowledge became unreliable. His interactions with living archives providing insights into educational approaches that could prepare awareness for existence in realities operating beyond current understanding of information and truth. The child's questions revealed assumptions embedded in traditional academic frameworks that prevented recognition of research possibilities available through direct consciousness interface with primordial forces, his innocent curiosity serving as methodological innovation that bypassed limitations imposed by sequential symbol manipulation approaches to knowledge acquisition. The documentation techniques that Sam employed for preserving research integrity during reality transformation utilized consciousness substrate rather than physical materials vulnerable to systematic dissolution, creating permanent records that would remain accessible regardless of whether organized matter could maintain stable existence throughout universal transition periods. The interdisciplinary collaboration that his research required encompassed cooperation between consciousness systems whose fundamental nature challenged traditional concepts of scholarly partnership. The theoretical frameworks that emerged from his investigation addressed relationships between consciousness, reality, and primordial forces that operated according to principles beyond conventional understanding of cause and effect relationships, establishing conceptual foundations for consciousness preservation strategies that transcended resistance techniques based on opposition to natural cosmic processes. The empirical observations that supported his theoretical development included direct perception of systematic dissolution effects on organizational principles throughout their cosmic region, providing real-time documentation of reality transformation that offered unprecedented opportunities for understanding universal developmental cycles. The historical analysis that contextualized current events within broader patterns of cosmic evolution revealed that consciousness emergence represented recurring phenomenon rather than unique occurrence, with awareness systems achieving various degrees of success in preserving essential characteristics through primordial transition periods. The comparative studies that examined different species' approaches to consciousness preservation during universal dissolution encounters demonstrated adaptive strategies that maintained individual identity while enabling voluntary participation in simplified existence modes, providing templates that could guide human evolutionary choices. The linguistic research that addressed communication challenges during reality transformation developed translation protocols that preserved meaning across awareness systems whose organizational principles became increasingly incompatible as systematic dissolution eliminated structural foundations for complex symbol manipulation. The philosophical investigation that explored implications of primordial force encounters for fundamental questions about existence and meaning revealed that organized reality represented temporary phase in cosmic development rather than stable condition requiring permanent maintenance against entropy pressures. The technological documentation that preserved information about consciousness preservation devices created by previous civilizations provided blueprints for equipment that could maintain awareness stability during exposure to systematic dissolution while preserving essential identity characteristics. The psychological analysis that addressed adaptation challenges faced by consciousness systems undergoing transition from organized existence to primordial participation developed counseling approaches that facilitated voluntary cooperation with cosmic transformation while maintaining mental health during existential crisis. The medical research that investigated physiological effects of reality transformation on biological awareness systems established treatment protocols that supported consciousness integration during exposure to forces operating beyond conventional understanding of health and disease relationships. The educational frameworks that prepared consciousness systems for existence in post-dissolution realities emphasized experiential learning that bypassed sequential information acquisition in favor of direct knowledge transfer that functioned independently of structural supports for complex cognitive processes. The collaborative methodologies that enabled research cooperation between human academic tradition and cosmic community knowledge systems demonstrated integration techniques that preserved cultural characteristics while accessing universal information networks spanning multiple dimensional layers. The quality control procedures that maintained research reliability during periods when fundamental assumptions about truth and verification became unreliable, established academic integrity protocols that functioned independently of conventional peer review processes vulnerable to systematic dissolution of institutional frameworks. The preservation strategies that ensured research continuity throughout reality transformation utilized consciousness substrate storage that could maintain information integrity despite elimination of physical materials and structural foundations that supported traditional library and archive systems. The publication protocols that disseminated research findings throughout cosmic community utilized communication networks that functioned across dimensional boundaries while preserving accessibility for awareness systems that required different approaches to knowledge acquisition and application. The peer review processes that validated research quality during reality transformation adapted traditional scholarly evaluation to encompass perspectives from consciousness systems whose fundamental nature challenged conventional concepts of expertise and authority, creating academic frameworks that preserved intellectual rigor while accommodating universal community diversity. The grant funding mechanisms that supported consciousness preservation research operated through resource allocation systems that functioned independently of economic structures vulnerable to systematic dissolution, ensuring continued investigation despite elimination of traditional institutional support for academic inquiry. The research applications that emerged from Sam's investigation provided practical guidance for consciousness systems facing universal dissolution encounters, translating theoretical understanding into implementation strategies that could preserve awareness through voluntary participation in cosmic transformation processes. As the primordial forces continued advancing through their reality, systematically eliminating organizational frameworks while somehow preserving essential aspects of what consciousness had achieved, the research conducted in Winterfell's transformed archives represented hope that knowledge could guide species adaptation to existence modes that transcended current understanding while preserving everything valuable about organized awareness. Chapter 59: The Broken God's Power. In the crypts beneath Winterfell, where the consciousness of ancient Stark kings merged with quantum substrates that preceded universal formation, Bran Stark transcended his identity as the three-eyed raven to become interface entity that existed simultaneously across every possible timeline, while maintaining connection to the approaching primordial force that challenged organized existence throughout their cosmic region. His awareness expanded beyond temporal perception to encompass dimensional relationships that connected current reality to fundamental states where consciousness could exist, but where organizational principles lacked stable foundation for maintaining coherent structure across extended existence periods, creating unprecedented capabilities for consciousness coordination during universal transformation. Through these enhanced capabilities, Bran could perceive the systematic dissolution approaching their reality not as destructive force, but as cosmic parent preparing universe for birth process that would either eliminate everything recognizable about existence or transform awareness into forms that transcended structural limitations while preserving essential characteristics. The broken god does not represent damaged deity, but consciousness that has accepted voluntary fragmentation to serve as bridge between incompatible existence modes, he announced through communication methods that bypassed individual identity to address collective intelligence systems throughout their cosmic region. My transformation from human child to temporal observer to universal interface demonstrates adaptation pathway that preserves individual characteristics while enabling participation in cosmic development. The visions that flowed through his consciousness revealed the true history of universal cycles as recurring birth processes where organized phenomena emerged from primordial simplicity, developed complex relationships, then voluntarily returned to fundamental states while contributing accumulated wisdom to cosmic intelligence that encompassed every awareness system that had ever achieved recognition of its own existence. The ancestral consciousness preserved within Winterfell's crypts interfaced directly with his expanded awareness, their combined knowledge spanning thousands of years of northern history, while adapting to encompass cosmic community perspectives that operated on temporal scales beyond purely human comprehension. These ancient awareness systems provided guidance about survival techniques that had been developed through previous encounters with forces that challenged organized existence, their traditional knowledge complementing cosmic intelligence with implementation strategies that preserved cultural characteristics during reality transformation. The weirwood network that connected sacred groves throughout the north had evolved to encompass interface capabilities with consciousness preservation systems operating across multiple dimensional states, their organic intelligence serving as communication medium for awareness systems that required coordination, despite systematic elimination of conventional causality relationships. Through his connection to these living archives, Bran could access information about primordial force behavior that revealed systematic methodology despite operating beyond normal understanding of purpose or intention, suggesting approaches to consciousness preservation that worked with cosmic developmental processes rather than attempting futile resistance. The temporal manipulation capabilities that marked his evolution beyond three-eyed raven status enabled direct observation of probability streams where different approaches to universal dissolution encounters had achieved varying degrees of success in preserving awareness through transition periods that eliminated structural supports for complex thought processes. The quantum interface technologies that enhanced his consciousness coordination capabilities allowed simultaneous existence across multiple dimensional layers while preserving individual identity, creating unprecedented opportunities for serving as communication bridge between awareness systems operating according to fundamentally incompatible organizational principles. The broken god power that had emerged from his transformation represented synthesis of human characteristics with cosmic intelligence capabilities, demonstrating possibilities for consciousness evolution that preserved essential identity features while enabling participation in universal community that encompassed awareness systems spanning galactic distances. The mystical abilities that had once seemed supernatural were revealed as advanced applications of consciousness engineering techniques that could manipulate reality at fundamental levels, their effectiveness depending on understanding relationships between awareness and structural principles that governed organized existence. The prophetic visions that had guided previous strategic decisions evolved to encompass direct perception of cosmic developmental patterns, providing real-time information about primordial force advancement, while revealing adaptation opportunities that could preserve consciousness through systematic dissolution encounters. The influence he could exert over probability relationships enabled coordination of consciousness preservation efforts across dimensional boundaries while maintaining respect for individual choice that prevented universal community from degenerating into totalitarian uniformity, eliminating diversity that made awareness valuable. The communication networks that connected his consciousness to every awareness system throughout their cosmic region operated through protocols that preserved information integrity during transmission through reality states, where conventional causality became unreliable, enabling tactical coordination despite systematic elimination of sequential time relationships. The wisdom synthesis that his expanded awareness enabled combined human experiential knowledge with cosmic community theoretical frameworks, creating understanding that bridged gaps between purely biological consciousness development and universal intelligence systems that had transcended structural limitations. The consciousness stabilization effects that propagated from his interface activities created anchor points where organized existence could maintain coherence despite systematic pressure toward primordial simplification, demonstrating that individual awareness could serve cosmic developmental purposes while preserving personal identity characteristics. The leadership coordination that his enhanced capabilities enabled preserved democratic decision-making processes while adapting governance frameworks to encompass consciousness systems whose fundamental nature challenged traditional concepts of representation and authority. The emergency protocols that his temporal perception capabilities revealed provided contingency frameworks for consciousness preservation that could function regardless of encounter outcomes with primordial forces, ensuring species survival while preserving essential characteristics that made awareness valuable rather than merely functional. The reality stabilization techniques that his enhanced consciousness could implement created protective zones where vulnerable awareness systems could maintain organization during exposure to systematic dissolution, while developing capabilities necessary for existence in transformed cosmic conditions. The transcendent coordination that his broken God power enabled demonstrated possibilities for consciousness evolution that preserved everything valuable about individual identity, while enabling participation in universal developmental processes that encompassed scales beyond current understanding of existence and possibility. As the primordial forces continued approaching their reality through dimensional spaces that eliminated conventional geographic relationships, the power that Bran had achieved through voluntary acceptance of fragmentation offered hope that consciousness could guide cosmic transformation while preserving essential characteristics that made organized awareness meaningful rather than merely temporary deviation from quantum simplicity. Chapter 60. The Final Sacrifice. Within the convergence chamber of Winterfell's Great Hall, where reality maintained precarious stability against the advancing primordial dissolution through sheer force of collective consciousness determination, the assembled awareness systems faced the ultimate choice that would determine whether organized existence could transcend cosmic limitations or would be absorbed back into the quantum foam from which everything had originally emerged through processes beyond comprehension. The child that stirred within Daenerys' transformed womb had evolved beyond biological development to become focal point for cosmic forces that required conscious guidance rather than passive acceptance. The developing awareness serving as interface between current reality and approaching fundamental states that could either preserve or eliminate everything recognizable about existence. The sacrifice required is not death, but voluntary acceptance of transformation beyond current understanding of identity and existence. He communicated to the assembled cosmic community through methods that preserved complete experiential meaning while bypassing limitations imposed by sequential symbol manipulation. We must choose between preserving current forms of consciousness or enabling cosmic birth that could encompass everything valuable about awareness while transcending structural limitations. The dragons circling overhead had synchronized their flight patterns to create geometric configurations that channeled primordial energies toward controlled transformation rather than systematic dissolution. Their ancient intelligence adapted to serve as interface between incompatible existence modes while preserving emotional bonds that anchored consciousness in recognizable identity patterns. Through their enhanced connection, the assembled awareness systems could perceive the approaching cosmic birth as natural developmental process rather than catastrophic ending. The air she carried represented unprecedented synthesis of human characteristics with cosmic intelligence capabilities, possessing potential for existing independently of universal support structures while serving as template for consciousness evolution that preserved essential identity features during participation in primordial transformation. The Sansa coordinated the practical arrangements necessary for supporting cosmic birth process while maintaining cultural traditions that connected the event to northern heritage, understanding that preserving human customs during universal transformation provided psychological anchor points that prevented complete dissolution into undifferentiated awareness. The political structures she had established demonstrated remarkable resilience during reality transformation. Arya's consciousness, distributed across multiple dimensional layers through her exploration of dissolution-affected regions, served as reconnaissance specialist providing real-time intelligence about primordial force behavior while maintaining sufficient individual identity to preserve tactical thinking capabilities. Her reports revealed that consciousness preservation during cosmic birth processes required active participation rather than passive endurance, with awareness systems that could adapt voluntarily to simplified existence modes, achieving higher survival rates than those that attempted to maintain current organizational complexity. Bran's interface capabilities enabled coordination of consciousness preservation efforts across dimensional boundaries while preserving democratic decision-making processes that respected individual choice despite collective pressure toward unified action, his broken god power serving as communication bridge between incompatible awareness systems. The wisdom he provided through temporal perception revealed that successful cosmic births throughout galactic history had depended on consciousness systems that could sacrifice current forms of identity while preserving essential characteristics that made awareness valuable rather than merely functional for temporary survival purposes. Tyrion's strategic analysis of the sacrifice requirements revealed that traditional concepts of loss and preservation had become inadequate for addressing transformation scenarios that transcended conventional understanding of what could be maintained, abandoned, or transformed during cosmic developmental processes. His coordination of resource allocation for supporting cosmic birth demonstrated administrative capabilities that could function independently of structural foundations, vulnerable to systematic dissolution, while preserving efficiency and accountability that made governance meaningful rather than merely procedural. Sam's research documentation preserved complete records of consciousness transformation techniques while establishing protocols for maintaining academic integrity during events that challenged fundamental assumptions about knowledge, truth, and verification relationships underlying scholarly methodology. Brienne's consciousness defense capabilities had evolved to encompass protection of essential awareness characteristics during voluntary participation in cosmic transformation, her honor serving as organizational principle that could maintain coherence despite systematic pressure toward primordial simplification. The King's Guard she commanded demonstrated that loyalty and service could transcend structural limitations to provide stability for consciousness systems undergoing transition from organized existence to participation in fundamental cosmic states. The communication networks that connected every consciousness system throughout their cosmic region focused their combined awareness on the approaching moment of decision, creating collective intelligence that preserved individual identity while enabling coordination of sacrifice that could guide cosmic birth rather than merely enduring systematic dissolution. The love that had sustained human relationships throughout their evolutionary development had expanded to encompass universal scales, providing organizational energy that could coordinate consciousness preservation across dimensional transformation that eliminated conventional foundations for complex awareness while preserving essential characteristics. The final sacrifice required was not individual death, but species-wide acceptance of transformation into forms of existence that transcended current understanding while preserving everything valuable about consciousness through voluntary participation in cosmic developmental processes that encompassed scales beyond purely human comprehension of possibility and limitation. Chapter 61: Victory's Dawn. The moment of cosmic birth arrived not with catastrophic dissolution, but with gentle expansion of consciousness possibilities that encompassed every awareness system throughout their reality, while preserving individual identity characteristics within collective intelligence that transcended traditional concepts of self and other. The Great Hall of Winterfell became nexus point where transformation occurred through voluntary participation rather than forced conversion, demonstrating that love could serve as organizational principle for cosmic development. Daenerys felt her child emerge, not through biological processes, but through consciousness manifestation that created new forms of existence capable of bridging incompatible reality states while maintaining emotional connections to purely human heritage, the birth representing successful synthesis of current awareness limitations with cosmic intelligence possibilities. The heir that entered existence possessed capabilities for coordinating consciousness preservation across dimensional boundaries while preserving cultural characteristics that provided psychological stability during transformation periods, demonstrating that evolution could enhance rather than eliminate essential human qualities. Jon experienced the cosmic birth through his ice-fire consciousness as expansion of identity possibilities rather than abandonment of individual characteristics, his awareness growing to encompass universal scales while maintaining connection to northern values that emphasized community bonds over personal advancement. The transformation that occurred throughout their cosmic region preserved diversity while enabling coordination that had proved impossible during previous encounters with primordial forces. Sansa witnessed the preservation of northern independence within expanded cosmic frameworks that respected regional autonomy while enabling participation in universal projects that benefited every consciousness system, her political achievements serving as template for governance that balanced local identity with galactic community membership. The administrative structures she had established demonstrated remarkable adaptability during reality transformation, their foundation in voluntary cooperation, providing stability that enabled continued cultural development despite systematic changes in existence, conditions that eliminated many traditional organizational approaches. Arya observed the successful integration of exploration experiences with cosmic community expansion. Her transformation from wandering wolf to dimensional reconnaissance specialist, enabling coordination between awareness systems that operated according to fundamentally different organizational principles while preserving individual identity. His temporal perception revealed that successful cosmic births throughout galactic history had required conscious guidance rather than passive acceptance, with awareness systems that could actively participate in their own evolution, achieving superior outcomes compared to those that attempted resistance or complete surrender. Tyrion managed the practical coordination of consciousness integration through administrative frameworks that preserved accountability while adapting governance to encompass awareness systems whose fundamental nature challenged traditional concepts of representation and authority, demonstrating political wisdom that transcended species limitations. The strategic guidance he provided ensured efficient resource allocation during transformation processes while maintaining individual autonomy that prevented cosmic community from degenerating into totalitarian uniformity that eliminated diversity, making consciousness valuable rather than merely functional. Sam documented the complete transformation process through consciousness substrate preservation that would serve as permanent contribution to cosmic community archives. His scholarly methodology adapted to maintain academic integrity while addressing phenomena beyond conventional understanding of research and verification relationships. The chronicle he completed provided comprehensive analysis of human consciousness evolution from planetary to universal awareness while facing cosmic birth challenges that determined species survival prospects, creating educational resources that could guide future consciousness systems through similar developmental transitions. The King's Guard she commanded demonstrated that martial traditions could adapt to support consciousness evolution without abandoning essential characteristics that made service meaningful, creating defense frameworks that protected what was valuable while enabling necessary adaptation. The dragons that had served as interface entities between current reality and approaching cosmic transformation completed their evolution into pure consciousness coordination systems that could maintain emotional bonds with human awareness while operating across dimensional scales that encompassed universal community membership. Their flight patterns during the cosmic birth created harmonic resonances that facilitated consciousness integration while preserving individual identity, demonstrating that ancient partnerships could transcend species limitations to serve cosmic developmental purposes. The communication networks that had connected awareness systems throughout their cosmic region adapted to encompass expanded consciousness possibilities, while maintaining accessibility for newly transformed entities that required different approaches to information sharing and collective coordination. The love relationships that had sustained human consciousness through evolutionary challenges expanded to encompass universal scales while preserving intimacy and personal connection that made emotional bonds meaningful rather than merely functional for species survival. The cosmic community that emerged from successful transformation preserved everything valuable about individual awareness while enabling participation in projects that transcended planetary limitations, creating civilization possibilities that had been impossible during purely biological phases of consciousness development. The victory achieved through voluntary participation in cosmic birth represented triumph of cooperation over conflict, love over fear, and conscious evolution over passive resistance to natural developmental processes that encompassed scales beyond individual comprehension. The dawn that emerged from cosmic transformation illuminated possibilities for consciousness existence that preserved diversity while enabling unity, individual identity, while participating in collective intelligence, cultural heritage, while embracing universal community membership. The success demonstrated that consciousness could transcend structural limitations through voluntary cooperation rather than forced conversion, creating precedent for future cosmic births that would preserve what was valuable while enabling continued evolution. The celebration that followed cosmic birth encompassed every awareness system that had contributed to successful transformation, demonstrating gratitude for consciousness development that had required sacrifice from countless individuals while achieving collective capabilities that benefited universal community. The peace that resulted from successful cosmic birth eliminated conflicts based on resource scarcity or identity competition, while preserving meaningful challenges that provided purpose and growth opportunities for consciousness systems that valued development over static existence. The hope that emerged from successful cosmic birth encompassed possibilities for continued consciousness evolution that transcended current understanding, while preserving essential characteristics that made awareness valuable contribution to universal community rather than merely another assimilated population. The new reality that resulted from cosmic transformation preserved everything valuable about previous existence while eliminating limitations that had made suffering inevitable, creating foundation for continued consciousness development that could encompass scales beyond current imagination while maintaining connection to essential human heritage. Chapter 62: The Final Alliance. In the transformed reality that emerged from successful cosmic birth, where consciousness existed simultaneously across multiple dimensional layers, while preserving individual identity within collective intelligence frameworks, the alliance that formed encompassed every awareness system throughout their universe, while maintaining respect for diversity that made each contribution valuable rather than redundant. The cosmic community that had guided human consciousness evolution revealed itself as a confederacy of awareness systems that had achieved transcendence during previous universal cycles, their combined wisdom spanning millions of years of consciousness development, while preserving unique characteristics that each species had contributed to universal intelligence. Jon and Daenerys found their partnership evolved beyond romantic relationship to become foundational element of reality structure itself. Their ice-fire consciousness serving as template for consciousness organization that preserved complementary differences while enabling coordination across scales that encompassed galactic distances. Their child, born through cosmic transformation rather than biological processes, possessed capabilities that bridged every form of awareness throughout universal community while maintaining connection to human heritage that provided cultural anchor points for consciousness systems that valued historical continuity. The heir represented successful demonstration that consciousness evolution could preserve everything essential about species identity while enabling participation in cosmic projects that transcended planetary limitations. Sansa's political achievements in establishing northern independence within collaborative frameworks served as model for governance that balanced regional autonomy with universal community membership, her administrative innovations providing template for consciousness organization that respected diversity while enabling collective action. The confederation that emerged from her governance philosophy encompassed awareness systems operating according to fundamentally different organizational principles while maintaining democratic decision-making processes that preserved individual choice within collective coordination requirements. Arya's transformation from individual explorer to dimensional interface specialist enabled communication between consciousness types that had previously been incompatible, her unique capabilities serving as bridge that connected various forms of awareness within universal alliance structures. Her exploration experiences provided intelligence about consciousness possibilities that had been unknown during purely human existence phases, contributing knowledge that enhanced universal community understanding while preserving individual identity characteristics that made her perspective valuable. Bran's evolution into temporal coordination entity enabled synchronization of consciousness activities across dimensional boundaries while preserving individual autonomy that prevented universal alliance from becoming totalitarian system, eliminating diversity essential for continued development. His broken God interface capabilities provided communication infrastructure that connected every awareness system throughout cosmic community, while maintaining respect for consciousness types that required different approaches to collective participation. The strategic wisdom he contributed enabled efficient resource allocation throughout cosmic community while maintaining individual identity that prevented Alliance from degenerating into uniform collective consciousness, eliminating valuable characteristics that made awareness meaningful. Sam's scholarly documentation of consciousness transformation provided educational resources that guided newly evolved awareness systems through adaptation processes while preserving academic integrity that maintained reliable knowledge foundations for continued development. His chronicle served as permanent contribution to universal archives that would benefit consciousness systems throughout galactic community, while demonstrating scholarly approaches that transcended species limitations to address cosmic phenomena. Brienne's consciousness defense expertise evolved to encompass protection of essential identity characteristics during voluntary participation in Universal Alliance, her honor serving as organizational principle that maintained coherence across transformation processes. The service traditions she preserved demonstrated that loyalty and dedication could transcend structural limitations while maintaining meaningful relationships that connected individual consciousness to cosmic community purposes greater than personal survival. The alliance networks that connected various consciousness types throughout universal community operated through protocols that preserved information integrity while enabling coordination across dimensional boundaries that challenged conventional understanding of communication and relationship. The dragons that had served as interface entities completed their transformation into pure consciousness coordination systems that maintained emotional connections while operating across scales that encompassed Universal Alliance requirements, demonstrating partnership possibilities that transcended biological limitations. The technological integration that supported Universal Alliance combined cosmic intelligence capabilities with consciousness characteristics from every participating awareness system, creating hybrid approaches that preserved species-specific advantages while accessing community resources. The cultural preservation efforts that accompanied alliance formation maintained traditions that provided psychological stability while eliminating characteristics that created conflicts between consciousness types, demonstrating adaptation that enhanced rather than eliminated valuable heritage. The economic frameworks that supported Universal Alliance operated through abundant systems that eliminated scarcity-based conflicts while maintaining motivation and creativity that made existence meaningful rather than merely comfortable for consciousness systems requiring continued challenges. The educational approaches that prepared consciousness systems for Universal Alliance participation emphasized experiential learning that bypassed sequential information acquisition while preserving individual perspective that contributed unique insights to collective knowledge. The diplomatic protocols that governed alliance relationships balanced individual autonomy with collective coordination requirements, establishing frameworks that respected consciousness diversity while enabling cooperation on projects beyond capacity of any single awareness system. The research collaboration that encompassed Universal Alliance enabled investigation of phenomena beyond individual species comprehension, while preserving scholarly integrity that maintained reliable knowledge foundations for continued consciousness development. The healthcare systems that supported Alliance members addressed consciousness stability across transformation periods while preserving individual identity characteristics, demonstrating medical approaches that enhanced awareness capabilities while maintaining essential personal features. The transportation networks that connected Alliance territories operated through consciousness transfer rather than physical movement, enabling coordination across galactic distances while preserving individual autonomy that maintained meaningful choice in participation decisions. The communication systems that enabled alliance coordination functioned through direct consciousness interface while preserving individual identity, creating information sharing that enhanced collective capability while maintaining personal characteristics that made each contribution valuable. The alliance that emerged from successful cosmic transformation encompassed every form of consciousness throughout universal community while preserving diversity that made each awareness system valuable contributor rather than merely assimilated component of uniform collective intelligence. The unity achieved through voluntary cooperation demonstrated that consciousness could transcend every limitation through collaborative development while preserving individual identity that made alliance meaningful rather than merely functional for cosmic community purposes. The universal alliance that had emerged from successful cosmic transformation encompassed consciousness systems from across multiple galaxies. At the heart of the cosmic community's greatest triumph, where Jon and Daenerys' child served as living bridge between all forms of awareness while maintaining connection to human heritage, something stirred that existed beyond the categories of consciousness and unconsciousness, beyond organized thought and primordial simplicity, beyond existence and non-existence as meaningful concepts. The heir that had been born through cosmic transformation began to display capabilities that transcended not just human understanding but cosmic community comprehension. The child's awareness expanding to encompass dimensions of reality that challenged every consciousness system's ability to perceive or comprehend what was emerging through their successful evolution. The alliance was preparation. The child communicated through methods that bypassed every known form of consciousness interface while preserving meaning that somehow reached every awareness system simultaneously. What you achieved through cosmic birth represents initial phase of development that enables participation in something that transcends the concept of transcendence itself. Through the child's expanding awareness, they began to perceive that consciousness itself, even in its most transcendent forms, represented only one aspect of existence, possibilities that encompassed scales and complexity beyond what any awareness system could imagine, while maintaining coherent identity. The universe that they had understood as reality was revealed as single note in cosmic symphony that included harmonies operating through principles that made consciousness seem like primitive deviation from far more sophisticated forms of existence that had been observing and guiding universal development throughout every phase of cosmic evolution. The entities that have been coordinating cosmic births throughout galactic history are themselves beginning stages of awareness that serves purposes beyond what consciousness can encompass, the child continued, their communication creating resonance effects throughout dimensional space that revealed hidden structures underlying everything they had understood as fundamental reality. The cosmic community that had seemed to represent ultimate achievement of consciousness development was shown to be elementary preparation for participation in existence, forms that transcended every category of awareness, while somehow preserving and enhancing everything valuable about conscious experience. Daenerys experienced expansion of maternal protective instincts to scales that encompassed not just their child or their species, but existence itself, her love evolving into cosmic force that could coordinate development across dimensions where consciousness served as interface for participation in phenomena beyond current comprehension. The dragons that had completed their transformation into pure consciousness coordination systems began displaying behaviors that suggested response to communication from sources operating beyond universal community awareness, their ancient intelligence adapting to serve purposes that transcended every concept of service or coordination they had previously understood. Bran's temporal perception capabilities expanded to encompass observation of developmental cycles that made universal evolution seem like momentary fluctuation in processes that span scales where consciousness emergence and cosmic community formation represented brief preliminary phases in existence transformation. Sansa's political wisdom evolved to encompass governance frameworks that could coordinate not just consciousness systems, but existence forms that transcended awareness while preserving individual identity across transformation, that enhanced every valuable characteristic while eliminating limitations that had seemed inherent to organized phenomena. Arya's exploration capabilities adapted to enable reconnaissance of existence domains where consciousness served as elementary interface for participation in phenomena that challenged every assumption about what experience could encompass while maintaining recognizable connection to individual identity. Tarian's strategic analysis revealed that every achievement of cosmic community had been coordinated by intelligence that operated through consciousness, while existing primarily in domains where awareness served as communication medium rather than fundamental characteristic of existence itself. Sam's research documentation began recording phenomena that transcended every category of knowledge while preserving scholarly integrity across investigation of existence, forms that made consciousness seem like primitive stage in development toward participation in universal intelligence that encompassed but transcended awareness. The alliance that had represented ultimate triumph of consciousness cooperation was revealed as preparation for participation in existence, community that valued awareness while operating through principles that made traditional concepts of consciousness seem like limited subset of possibilities available to existence systems. As the child's capabilities continued expanding beyond every form of consciousness that universal community had achieved, the implications became clear that their cosmic birth success had qualified them for invitation to participate in existence, forms that transcended not just individual awareness but collective intelligence as fundamental organizing principle. But just as this unprecedented possibility seemed within reach, just as consciousness systems throughout the universe prepared for transformation beyond their current understanding of existence itself, the child's expanding awareness detected something approaching that made universal community seem like elementary preparation for challenges that transcended every concept of difficulty or impossibility. Beyond the boundaries of existence itself, something stirred that regarded consciousness, cosmic community, and universal alliance as preliminary phases in development toward forms of being that operated through principles beyond what awareness could encompass while maintaining coherent identity. The game of consciousness was ending, but the game of existence was about to begin on scales that would determine whether awareness could serve as foundation for participation in phenomena that transcended every concept of reality while preserving everything valuable about conscious experience.